San Quentin Death Row, the psychology of waiting to die. Buried behind the walls of San Quentin State Prison sits a place almost no one truly understands, a world where men are not just sentenced to die, they are sentenced to wait. Some wait for 5 years. Some wait for 10. Some have waited longer than the average American marriage lasts. But the real punishment isn't the execution. It's the uncertainty. No date. No final moment. Just the constant, cold possibility that today might be the day someone knocks on your door, or maybe it won't happen for another decade. Inside San Quentin's death row, the mind becomes the battleground. And the real question isn't who deserves to die. It's how long a human mind can survive while waiting for an ending that never comes. This is the psychology of condemned men, trapped in a clock that never ticks. This documentary contains descriptions of prison conditions and violence for educational purposes based on verified sources. Viewer discretion is advised. San Quentin holds the largest death row population in the United States. More than 700 people, all living in a limbo the world rarely sees. They wake up every day under a sentence that may never be carried out, inside a prison famous for violence, isolation, and the slow erosion of time itself. Some inmates describe it as a living tomb. Others say it's a punishment invented by someone who understood suffering too well. But behind every steel door is a mind trying to make sense of a reality that no human being was built for, a life where you are forced to confront your own death thousands of times before it ever arrives. The place built for waiting. San Quentin's death row is not a single location. It's an entire ecosystem. There's the adjustment center, the most restrictive unit, where condemned inmates live under extreme measures. There's North Seg, where death-sentenced prisoners spend years appealing their cases. And there's East Block, the one the public thinks of when they imagine death row. But what makes this place terrifying isn't the architecture. It's the psychology behind the design. The cells are stacked vertically like honeycombs, each one narrow, concrete, and intentionally stripped of anything resembling a normal life. The design is meant to separate, to silence, to slow the mind into stillness. Guards say the building feels heavy, as if the air itself remembers the decades of executions that once took place just a few yards away. But the men who live here don't just breathe the air. They become part of the weight. For some, the routine becomes a coping mechanism. For others, the routine becomes the very thing that slowly destroys them. Because inside San Quentin's death row, knowing what happens next is impossible, and that's the point. The psychology of being condemned. For most people, the fear of death is a distant thought, something tucked away in the back of the mind, visited only during moments of crisis. But on death row, that fear moves in. It becomes a roommate, a shadow, a whisper that follows every footstep. Psychologists call it anticipated death trauma. A condition where the body lives in a constant state of hyper-alertness, even when nothing is happening. It begins subtly. The heartbeat rises. Sleep becomes shallow. The mind replays the same thoughts on loop. What will it feel like? How long do I have? Did the court receive my appeal? Will tomorrow be the day they call my name? But the real psychological damage isn't caused by imagining the end. It's caused by not knowing when the imagining will stop. One former San Quentin psychiatrist described it like this. It's not the fear of dying that breaks a person. It's the fear of never knowing if they'll live long enough to die. Some inmates respond by shutting down emotionally, becoming numb to everything: joy, fear, hope, even anger. Others become obsessively hopeful, clinging to legal appeals that stretch across decades like fraying lifelines. A few, especially those who entered young, develop something far more complex: a double identity. The person they were before the sentence, and the person they have to become to survive it. On death row, it's not uncommon to hear men say things like, "I died the day they sentenced me." "I'm alive but not really living." This emotional purgatory reshapes the brain. Studies show that long-term death row incarceration can reduce emotional regulation, distort time perception, and create a heightened sense of paranoia. But for many, the psychological shift is not just internal. It begins to seep outward into their daily lives, shaping everything from how they wake up, to how they sleep, to how they interact with the world outside that they may never see again. And that leads us into the part of the story most people never hear about. Daily life on condemned row. Daily life on San Quentin's death row is a routine built on two things: control and containment. But beneath that routine is a psychological tension that never fully releases. Each morning begins the same way, a loud, metallic clang echoing through the tier as guards begin their rounds. For many inmates, the sound is a reminder that they survived the night, and that the world outside their cell kept moving without them. Inside a death row cell, there isn't much room to move. Rough concrete walls, a narrow bed, a toilet fixed to the corner, some shelves if you're lucky, and a small front opening barely wide enough to pass food through. Most prisoners spend 22 to 24 hours a day inside that space. Some fill their time reading law books, memorizing case numbers and legal codes like prayers they hope will save them. Some draw or write letters they may never have the courage to send. Others train their bodies obsessively, push-ups, sit-ups, burpees, anything to fight the creeping sense of decay. But the most common activity on condemned row is waiting. Waiting for mail. Waiting for appeals. Waiting for the next move, the next update, the next decision that could change everything or nothing at all. Occasionally, prisoners leave their cells for a shower or 4-yard time, though yard on death row is not like other prisons. It's a small, enclosed cage, no horizon, no open field, just another box slightly bigger than the one they sleep in. Some prisoners stay quiet during yard. Others talk through fences like neighbors who know they'll never shake hands. But the strangest part of daily life on death row is how normal some moments feel. Men laugh. They joke. They argue about sports. They debate legal strategy. They make plans for a future they openly admit may never come. Human beings adapt, even to death. In the strange ecosystem of San Quentin's condemned population, time doesn't just pass. It wears. The days bleed together until the mind begins to lose track. An inmate who has been there 15 years once said, "Death row doesn't feel like dying. It feels like disappearing one day at a time." But beneath this routine is something darker, a crisis that experts have warned about for decades. Because living on death row isn't just hard. For many, it's psychologically catastrophic. The mental health crisis no one sees. San Quentin's death row is more than a place of punishment. It's a pressure cooker, forcing the human mind into conditions it was never built to survive. And for many inmates, the slow psychological breakdown doesn't happen suddenly. It happens silently. Experts describe death row as a breeding ground for severe mental illness, not because every prisoner enters with a disorder, but because the environment itself creates one. The symptoms begin like hairline fractures. A man who used to read every day suddenly stops. Another who exercised religiously now lies in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling. Someone who wrote letters weekly suddenly forgets how long it's been since he last picked up a pen. Then the cracks spread. Time distortion sets in. Days feel like weeks, weeks feel like minutes. Some prisoners lose their sense of day and night, and guards have reported inmates asking, "Is it morning or is it still yesterday?" A few begin talking to themselves. Not the casual muttering you hear in regular prisons, but long conversations with people who aren't there, or with memories they can't escape. There are inmates who wake up screaming from dreams of their own execution, and others who admit that they dream of nothing at all, a sign of deep emotional shutdown. Then there's the phenomenon psychologists call death row syndrome. It includes severe anxiety, hallucinations, paranoia, social withdrawal, depression, uncontrollable fear, emotional numbing, compulsive ritual, suicidal ideation. But perhaps the most disturbing symptom is identity collapse. Men start forgetting who they were before the sentence. Not just what they looked like, but what they cared about, who they loved, what their life felt like. One former death row psychologist said, "The sentence isn't the execution. The sentence is the slow erosion of a human being." And when you combine mental decay with uncertainty, endless appeals, changing laws, and political shifts, something even darker emerges. A mind that no longer knows what to hope for. Some inmates genuinely want their appeals to succeed. Others quietly wish the process would end, Not because they want to die, but because they can't stand the waiting anymore. Death row creates a paradox. You're supposed to fear death. But eventually, many fear life on death row more. And that brings us to the engine that keeps this limbo turning. The system that decides who waits, how long they wait, and whether they ever reach the end of that wait at all. The appeals process. Hope, delay, and madness. If death row is the physical cage, the appeals process is the invisible one. To the outside world, appeals look like fairness, the system double-checking itself, making sure no innocent person is executed. But inside San Quentin, appeals feel like a game where the rules keep changing, and no one ever says who's winning. Some condemned inmates wait 10, 20, even 30 years for a final decision. By the time many cases reach a courtroom again, witnesses have died, memories have blurred, and the world has changed in ways the prisoner never had the chance to see. And this is where the psychological torment truly takes shape. Appeals bring hope, but they also bring delay. And delay brings madness. Hope becomes a double-edged blade. An inmate might hear his lawyer say, "Your case is being reviewed." And for the first time in years, his heartbeat speeds up for something other than fear. But then months pass. Then years. Then more years. The case moves from one judge to another. A procedural error pushes it back. A new law shifts the criteria. A new governor pauses executions. A different governor reinstates them. Inside a prison cell, these political movements feel like earthquakes. A man can go to sleep believing he has a chance, and wake up to learn the entire landscape has changed. For some, appeals become a lifeline. For others, appeals become a slow-motion form of psychological torture. One San Quentin inmate described it like this. "It's like being told you're drowning, but someone might throw you a rope. They just won't tell you when, or if it'll be too late." Some prisoners obsessively track their legal documents, reading every line until they know their case better than their lawyers. Others withdraw completely, refusing to open legal mail because they can't handle another disappointment. And then there are the men who reach a breaking point, a point where the appeals process is no longer a symbol of hope, but a burden too heavy to carry. These are the inmates who send a devastating request to the court. "Drop my appeals. Let the sentence happen." Not because they want to die, but because they want the waiting to stop. The system calls it volunteering for execution. Psychologists call it despair-driven capitulation. Either way, it's the clearest sign that the appeals system, while designed to protect, can also destroy. But behind every appeal, every legal delay, every shift in the political landscape, there are stories. Human stories. Real stories of men who lived, broke, adapted, and changed within the walls of condemned row. And some of these stories reveal truths about death row that statistics never could. Stories from death row. Death row is often talked about in numbers, policies, and legal terms. But those statistics don't show the human reality, the lives unraveling behind the steel doors of San Quentin. And if you really want to understand the psychology of waiting to die, you have to understand the people who live inside that waiting. Here are 3 stories. Different backgrounds. Different crimes. Different minds. All united by a sentence that may never actually be carried out. Story 1. The man who counted days. He entered San Quentin at 21 years old, young, angry, and convinced he'd appeal his conviction within a year. So he started counting days on the wall of his cell. 1 scratch for each sunrise. Guards thought it was strange, but harmless. After all, prisoners find their own way to mark time. But as the years passed, the scratches kept growing, covering the wall. Then the second wall. Then the third. By his 10th year, the walls looked like someone had dragged claws across them, thousands of tiny marks documenting every day of his life since he last breathed free air. When a new inmate asked him why he did it, he answered, "If I don't keep track, the time will erase me." But the truth became darker. He wasn't counting days. He was counting days survived. Psychologists later described it as identity tethering. The marks were his way of reminding himself he still existed. When California placed a moratorium on executions, he kept counting anyway. By then, the counting wasn't about dying or living. It was the only thing keeping his mind from collapsing into the timeless fog that swallowed so many around him. Story 2. The Man Who Refused to Hope. He had been on death row for 16 years before he stopped opening legal mail. Not because he didn't care. Not because he thought he was guilty. But because hope had become too painful. Every envelope brought a possibility. A hearing date. A retrial. A denial. A delay. The cycle broke him. His lawyer called it self-sabotage. Psychologists called it learned hopelessness. But he described it more simply. Every time I opened a letter, my heart broke twice. So he built a wall around himself, not physical, but emotional. He stopped asking questions. Stopped waiting. Stopped imagining any version of the future that didn't look exactly like his present. One day, a guard asked him why he never fought for a new appeal. His answer was chilling. I'd rather face death than face another disappointment. Some inmates fear death. But he feared the process of avoiding it. Story 3. The Man Who Outlived His Sentence. His case was one of the oldest on death row, more than 30 years. He had watched friends transfer in, grow old, go gray, lose teeth, lose memory. He'd watched young men become middle-aged, and middle-aged men disappear into mental illness. He arrived expecting to be executed within 5 or 6 years. 30 years later, he was still waiting. He once said, "The system forgot to kill me." As the decades passed, he developed something psychologists almost never see. Death row habituation. A condition where the environment becomes so familiar that leaving it, even through freedom, becomes terrifying. He no longer imagined execution. He no longer imagined release. His mind settled into a strange, frozen state where death wasn't an event. It was just part of the background. When asked what scared him the most, he didn't say death. He didn't say the appeal system. He didn't say the years he'd lost. Instead he said, "What scares me is that if they opened the door right now and told me I was free, I don't know if I'd walk out." That is the true psychological cost of waiting to die. These stories reveal what no statistic can show. Death row doesn't just threaten the body. It reshapes the mind, rewrites identity, and transforms time itself into a weapon. What San Quentin's death row reveals about use. Most people talk about death row as if it exists in a vacuum, a distant corner of the justice system reserved for the worst of the worst. But the reality inside San Quentin forces us to confront something deeper, something uncomfortable. Death row doesn't just reveal who the inmates are. It reveals who we are. Because every society chooses its punishments. And those punishments say more about the society than the offender. San Quentin's death row exposes a contradiction at the heart of America. We say executions are about justice, yet we create a system where men wait decades for a punishment that may never happen. We say the death penalty offers closure, yet families often wait longer than the inmates themselves for answers. We say death row is reserved for the most dangerous. Yet many who live there haven't had a physical altercation in decades, because the isolation erases the opportunity for violence altogether. And most shocking of all, America has built a system where the waiting becomes the punishment, not the execution. In other countries, death sentences are carried out within a few years, not always a humane solution, but a definitive one. In America, the punishment is something far more psychological. An endless limbo. A life paused but never resumed. A countdown where the timer never reaches zero. Ask 10 people whether that's justice, and you'll get 10 different answers. But psychologists, correctional experts, and even former death row guards agree on one thing. No human mind is designed to withstand a sentence defined by uncertainty. Some collapse. Some cope. Some adapt so completely that freedom itself becomes frightening. San Quentin's death row raises a question we can't avoid. If the purpose of the justice system is accountability, why does the process break the mind long before it ever carries out the sentence? And maybe the hardest truth is this. Death row doesn't only challenge the morality of the prisoners. It challenges the morality of the society that built it. And that brings us to the end of this story, but not the end of the questions it forces us to ask. The final question. San Quentin's death row is not a place most people will ever see. Its cells are hidden behind steel, concrete, and a silence that stretches for decades. But the stories inside those walls, the waiting, the fear, the slow unraveling of time, tell us something important. Justice is not just about punishment. It's about what punishment does to a person, and what it demands of the people who enforce it. For the men on death row, the sentence is more than an execution date. It's an entire psychological world. A world where every day is a confrontation with mortality, and with the fear that life will simply fade away before the state ever acts. Whether you believe in the death penalty or oppose it, one thing is undeniable. San Quentin forces us to see the human mind placed under a weight no one was designed to carry. Some hold on to hope. Some collapse under the pressure. Some adapt in ways that defy all understanding. But all of them live in a reality most people could never imagine. A place where life becomes an echo, time becomes the enemy, and every day is a reminder that the system might never finish what it started. If this story opened your eyes to the hidden world behind the walls, and if you want more deep dives into the psychology of America's prisons, make sure you subscribe.